paired with the beanie?
I have 100 beanies.
Oh my god, I was
Fun
literally about
fact.
to say same color beads.
Right off the bat.
With beanies and a crown. I also have a crown.
May we
Yes.
see it?
Yeah, I can show my crown.
Oh,
Yes!
we're ready. Yes!
And hello.
Oh my god, that's everything.
It's
Wait,
cute,
because
right?
I live
Very.
for
Oh my
iridescent
God.
anything, and that is.
I didn't realize it was so nearby. It's good. It's good I had that.
Easy
You can wear it
access.
for the interview if you want.
Yeah.
Honestly.
Oh my God.
My
After
beanie.
all the
Fair
awards
enough.
you've won, bitch, you are a queen. So.
Our guest this week is Raja Feather Kelly. You all know him as the artistic director of the Feather Theory, a dance company he made himself. You know him as the artistic director of the New Brooklyn Theater, which he helped make better himself. And you know him as the choreographer of the Pulitzer Prize winning Fairview, the I'm just going to say it, the soon-to-be Drama Desk winning A Strange
Period.
Loop,
Mhm.
and the director and choreographer of We're Gonna Die, which Mariah and I saw right before all this went down.
Yes, we were like, oh my god, we're gonna die. And then
And
Here
then
we
We
are.
died.
I wanted to tell you really quickly, like, I spoke to my friend Ure, shout out to Ure, who is also a dancer. When I told her that we were gonna have you on, we both sort of had the same thought, and we were like, this guy is the Bill T. Jones of our time. We're watching him evolve into like this collaborator from dance and creating his own social commentary. When theater makers realize that we need that voice, they grab him as soon as they can, and you know, soon enough he's gonna have a Tony, and that'll be fine. But nonetheless, we both had the same thought, that we were like, this guy's the same, it's the Bill T. Jones of our time. And she was like, how did you know I thought that? Didn't I tell you that? And I was like, no. Did you
Oh my
know?
God.
Did we talk? No. But yeah.
Okay, you guys are all up in my questions right now. You and Ure were in my questions.
that's why I
Go
don't
ahead.
Google Doc. You better don't be using Google Docs. So that no,
Read us, please.
This is not a shared document.
That's my bad, honestly. I'm not even gonna admit it. That's my bad. Well, I wanted to kind of get more into the conversation and also give Raja a chance to, you know, I guess react for our listeners, because we have this podcast is a Zoom cast, and you know, people are gonna watch it, but you can also go listen to it on Spotify. So if you could just express or, you know, explain how you feel listening to Keith's predictions.
Yeah, I'll take everybody back. So everyone, as Keith began to introduce me, I went through the range of like, oh my gosh, that's so sweet. Oh God. Oh, please don't. Wow, fuck. Yeah, ow, got it. Yes, into it. Oh God, please don't. All right, you know what? All right, I'm into it. Those were the faces I was making. For those of you who couldn't see, those were the faces that's how I would describe the faces I was making during that. It was a beautiful introduction. I actually, you know, all of this is in your hands. This is all in y'all's hands. You know, all of that. I'm just.
It is.
I wanted to ask you, what do you think it takes to be a great choreographer? Like, what do you, when you're working with someone, like from your experience, like what were things that you looked for in a choreographer, and what do you try to implement into your own craft?
Yeah, I don't know. I can't say that I know what the ingredients are that make a great choreographer. I don't know if I know that. That's why, I mean, I feel like who gets to decide, I wonder like who gets to decide who's great and who's not great. I certainly don't want to be a person that has to decide who or what is great. That would be too difficult for me. I have enough choices to make. I'm just like, have breakfast. But I do think that being a good listener and being able to respond to the room, but maybe most importantly is like what I feel excited about when I'm working with someone I'm the leader, or if I'm working with someone and I am a collaborator, I'm like, what can I do? How can I make the space for people to be able to do their best work?
Mm.
And like, who's gonna let me do the thing that I do? Like, I have felt super lucky that when I work with people, they're like, Raja, you do the thing you do, we'll be right here. You know, let us know when you need some feedback, when you wanna, you know, spar, when you wanna like having those kinds of thought partners and collaborative partners it just makes me feel like I'm like free when I feel freedom to just do what and to realize my vision or help someone else realize their vision. Like, how could it not be great, right?
How do you know when it's time to like take a step back with your input, and how do you know when to fill the space?
I certainly enter rooms and I'm like very scared. I feel like it takes a lot of trust to work. Now, I don't know what it is for many people. I feel like if you're working with me as a collaborator, like, you trust me, because I don't believe that I work conventionally in any sense of the word or method. And so the way that I do things and the way that I approach theater making is not conventional. It's very different. And so when people invite me to a room, one, I'm like, well, if you're inviting me into this room, you have to trust me. And two, and if you trust me, that makes me very scared for you. Because I'm like, oh, like, oh, shit. You know, like, they trust me. Like, that's a lot of responsibility now. And my, you know, number one pillar is entering into the unknown. Like, I don't show up to rooms having choreographed anything. I don't show up like, okay, y'all, here's my 8 counts. I'm like, you know, who's in the room? How y'all doing? You know, I really like to get to know people and make the movement or the work, if I'm working on, you know, theater and not movement, come from the people that are in the room. And I feel like being able to be a person that is like observant and understands like how to devise in the moment. It really helps you understand this line that you're talking about, Keith. I also feel like I feel excited by the people who I collaborate, and I become like a loyalist. So like, once I start collaborating with you, I become very loyal. Because it's important to me to become very familiar, to become friends, and to become very close with my collaborators. So is that I trust that they will tell me what I need to know, and when to sit down, or when to step up, or when to not show up, or to do more. If I don't have that rapport that you would have like with a friend who's like, boo boo, shh, and that like, okay, stop yelling at me. But I'm like, okay, you know, like, I need to shut up. You know, I need to just sit down. Things like that. You know, being able to have that rapport with someone that allows you to feel comfortable leading and following and adding a take.
I definitely feel that with the crew that I have here, because like, there have been multiple times over the past 2 weeks where like, we had an ambition to just talk to artists that we admire, who we can learn from, but people that we can talk to also. And the only way we're going to make that happen is if I can communicate effectively with my team. And I think you know that from running your dance company. We May Never Dance Again is a documentary that Raja made, watching his company create together and endure being in the eye of the storm, and being able to watch Raja be a leader and also a hawk, like seeing him, you know, give initiative. And I think my favorite thing, I wrote a couple down of my favorite quotes. One of your dancers said, like, how are you doing? And she said, lots of joy, I giggle, and sometimes I feel like I'm dying. One of my favorite quotes. There was a whole section where you were giving a critique saying like, don't explain to me what you're about to do, because that takes all the tension out of the room, and there's no tension in predictability. And I value that, because I have literally a year ago, I've grown so much as an artist myself, and as a collaborator just in being able to bring to the room instead of like show the room what I want to do. And I found myself doing that like about a year ago. And I was like, oh, if I do this, this is going to look really good. And they were all like, well, okay, like you're spoiling the art for us. You're spoiling the moment. So I want to ask you like where you learned to let the moments breathe.
Where did I learn that? Wow. Interestingly, I have just so I guess 5 days ago, I celebrated the 15-year death anniversary of my theater teacher from high school. And I've been reminded of just how much this incredible man, Vincent Borelli, really imparted onto me in my life. I was a competitor in public speaking all through high school. Like every Saturday, I would compete in public speech. Here we go. Can't even speak. Public speaking. And there were different categories. You know, like dramatic interpretation, humorous interpretation. But it was only 10 minutes long, so you would compete in like 10 minutes. And I feel that over the course of learning hundreds and hundreds of plays and monologues and poems and short form fiction, and being able to like understand the world at which those plays and shows, etc., existed, and to smash them into 10 minutes of time and then like present them as a solo performance and be coached by Vincent Borelli. It just like, I felt like I got like this, every day was like a crash course in what theater was, that like I had to embody in 10 minutes. Like you have to embody all of theater in 10 minutes, go. And what I felt the biggest lesson in a lot of that were restraint. Like it was more about like not as much as you give, but as much as you hold. And I feel like that is related to what our experience of being alive feels like. Like we feel the tension of being alive. And I think sometimes in theater, perhaps like we want to just like express and like let it all out. And I was like, well, I think if we're mirroring the world or mirroring society, like there's much more tension involved. There's much more like, you know, we're all inside our bodies and okay, I'm gonna go too deep, but you know, like we're all inside our bodies, and that's like there is a freedom there, but there also is restraint. You know, like
definitely
in this body.
It makes so much sense. Especially seeing A Strange Loop. I have never seen a piece of theater like it before in my life. I sat glued to my chair, just jaw open the entire time, because one, the movement on stage was so human. It like exactly what you were saying about sometimes the problems with musical theater is it's like very expressive and very general. And I felt like your work and everyone's work in Strange Loop, it was just so specific and human. I think that is what made it so incredible. Well, one of the reasons why it's so incredible.
Yeah, you know, I often feel like people probably don't know what, I mean, it's a musical, right? So there's like a lot of dancing and movement in the show. However, there's like a lot of nuance that like perhaps someone would call staging, but that's actually choreography. And that's what I really, really get excited by, you know. There's a weird thing because sometimes you're like, I feel like when I entered the sort of off-Broadway or more commercial theater, I felt like the more people didn't know what I was doing, the better I was at doing it. Right?
I love that so much.
You know, there's this thing where it's like, well, you know, the idea is that it should feel so, like the choreography should feel so natural and so much like the behavior of the people on stage that it should be somewhat challenging for people to say like, well, like what there's a choreography.
Is it choreography or staging? Because that Yeah.
Or just like, is there choreography in this? Like, why? You know, like a lot of my work actually was on plays. Like when I first started choreographing, it was like on plays, and I actually remember sitting in the audience and people would be like, why is there a choreographer attached to this show? Because like if you watch, it's just like people like. Choreography and that. But that's where the work for me becomes really exciting, is that it's like minute, it's behavior, and then that volume gets turned up, and then it's choreography. And then it's also exciting, like this year, you know, like to be nominated for Lortel. You're like, oh wow, I guess people do I guess people are seeing it. I guess they're like seeing that the work I do, which can be very
we definitely saw it.
I also wanted to take a moment because it's crazy that you mentioned who like your mentor was and how you were reflecting on their passing, because the first person to believe in me as an actor was like this guy who I just took a scene study class with because I heard he was great my senior year. I'd already taken it. His name was Charles Tuthill. And he was the first person to be like, you need to do this. Charles was the first person to like validate it. And he made me and my friend Ty his TA, and he suddenly passed 2 weeks before our finals. Shout out to all the like mentors who made us who we are.
That's a very similar story to what happened with Vincent Borelli. When he passed away, it was like, it was April 20th, and school wasn't over until June, and we had like our, you know, it was like one. I mean, in this weird way, it's like just like TV. It was like, well, we have our final show. Yeah, like, Mr. Borelli has like, you know, died of cancer, and like we have to do it. Like, you know, like, and we like, you know, came together, and like all of the lessons that we had learned over 5 years, and like went to the competition and like won, and it was like, it is made. And, like, you know, it's just like, it's like just one of those like made for TV moments, but that like it will never leave us.
We need to talk about the importance of Fairview. I don't know if Chris and Mariah got a chance to see Fairview, but I'm gonna try and break it down in like a minute for you, and then like you can try and, you know, we'll see. It's only like 12 parts.
Please
of
polish
like,
it.
We hear family affair, and we hear that for like half an hour while a family is getting ready for a birthday dinner, and then you know, somebody faints, and then the show starts over after half an hour, and everything's on mute except we listen to a podcast by a bunch of white people talking about race. If I'm going to be honest, it's my biggest nightmare about starting a podcast and even starting to talk about race. But as we catch up to that,
that's why you got people of color to help you out, babe.
Exactly. You know, make sure there's not a drone, you know, of just, you know,
exactly.
Yeah.
Because I'm not a complete buffoon. Anyhow,
you're beautiful.
Catch up to the story, and then as we come in and continue it, the Jackson 5 comes on, and the dinner is ready, and they just keep bringing out more and more food onto the table, an absurd amount, like I'm talking about, like, we start with potatoes, then we get to like steak, and then we get to like a massive lobster, and then a massive turkey, and like it's just everything stacks up on each other. It's absurd. And then the people from the podcast invade the story and take over for the characters, change the circumstances to make them more racist, until the original family asks them to stop and like ask the audience to come on stage and just take a look at the theater around them. And Raja, I wanted to ask you, when you joined this project, what was your task? How did you see the piece as a whole? And what did you do to contribute to telling the story?
Okay.
Wow.
When I
big
like, first of all, how did he do? How did he do?
Well, I think you did good without spoiling like what the show is. I think you did very good.
Fabulous.
Tried.
You had 3 questions. I was asked to be the choreographer for this non-musical show, this play. I started working on the show before its very first public performance. It was in process for a couple of months before that, is my understanding. And then it was going to start a process to be presented at Soho Rep, and then I stayed with it when it went to Berkeley Rep, and then I stayed with it when it went to Theater for a New Audience, and I'm currently with it now. And my take on what the show was that it was an essay. I remember meeting with Jackie and Sarah, and I was like, this is not a play. This is an essay. And thankfully and excitingly, like I was explaining to you earlier, when you're working with people who want you to be their thought partners, I have to say it becomes very, the lines are blurred between, you know, what a traditional role of a choreographer should be versus like being in a collaboration with a playwright and a director on understanding how to bring to audiences a conversation around surveillance, a conversation around race, a conversation around theater, a conversation around absurdity. And particularly, I think, for me, obviously, if not, a conversation on how are these things embodied. So that's how I entered. That's what I believed my tasks were, and that's how I approached it. I approached it in this way of like, okay, how do I transform this essay into a theatrical event in collaboration with Jackie and Sarah and the rest of the design team, Montana, Mikhail, Mimi Leon.
I wanted to ask you, out of all of your many awards and achievements,
Sorry,
it's the truth. What do you feel the most proud of in terms of what you've been able to accomplish so far in your career?
Ooh,
That is such an out of body question.
I know.
Chris is not ready for the answer. We're not ready. We're not ready for the answer.
I just feel like, okay, look. What is kind of weird and also kind of amazing is like, I feel like every show I work on like takes over their own categories.
I love that. Yeah.
Like
that completely answers the question. Yeah.
I'm like, look, I love, like, when, like, if I like go through the Rolodex of shows that I've worked on, right? Like, I feel like, and it hasn't been that many. Like, it's oddly, I mean, I don't know, comparatively to somebody, it hasn't been that many, but like working on Susan Laurie Parks's Death of the Last Black Man in the Whole Entire World, there's just like, that revival was unstoppable. Right? Liliana Blaine Cruz is incredible. Working on Adrienne Kennedy's A Funny House of a Negro, like that production was like, come for me. Like, you really, are you kidding? That was incredible. Working on Brandon Jacob Jenkins' Everybody at the Signature Theater, and, you know, working on that show, and like, I love joking around because like my task in that show was like a blank piece of paper in the middle of the script that said like La Dance Macabre, and then me and Lila and Brandon were like, you know, what are we gonna do here? Brandon was like, I want skeletons. I want like 15-foot skeletons. And I'm like, I'm not a puppeteer, but I'll figure this out, you know. So there's that. And then like fast forward, you know, working with Tori Sampson on If Pretty Hurts and Ugly's a Motherfucker. Like, there's just nothing like these shows. Hurricane Diane, nothing like that show. And then Mrs. Murray's Menagerie, nothing's like that show. You know, I worked on the storm scene in King Lear on Broadway. People don't even know that. Like, nothing like that scene. And then if you come to like the more recent things, like A Strange Loop, like who's about to categorize A Strange Loop? It's in a category of its own. How can you categorize Fairview? It's in a category of its own, and it's got a Pulitzer.
Okay.
And then to do, you know, We're Gonna Die, to be able to have young Jean be like, here, take this non-musical that I wrote, and just like, I'm gonna leave, and you just kind of do whatever you want with it, right? Like, that's just, you know. It's these opportunities that I've been given and that people trust me to collaborate on are just in a league of their own, and I feel fortunate and responsible for them in a way that, like, I as long as people continue to trust me to make work for them, I will like continue to give my best work. And that feels like then I don't have to create a hierarchy between them. I just get to be like, I'm blessed.
I guess I wanted to, we can focus on, I guess, our last production, me and Keith, that we saw that you were involved in, We're Gonna Die, which you just mentioned. That, we went to a matinee of that production. We were there, it was like midday, you know, there was folks there of, you know, we were probably the youngest people in the audience at the time. You know, just like a lot of older white folks, you know, in the audience. And I really appreciated where this play, musical, not play, goes, you know, for a not play, not musical, it had a choreographer, it had music, it had all of the elements, you know, and one of the questions that we were getting, Keith and I, on our way out, was, what did you think of that? Was that intense for you? You know, from these much older people, like they're like, you know, they're like grappling, I guess, with this idea that we're gonna die. You know, it's very close to home. So, you know,
especially now.
But one of them brought up to me, they were like, when I was your age, this is, you know, death was something I was comfortable with. I had come to grips with. And because I asked them originally, I was like, how did you feel? You know, they were like, how do you feel about this? You're like, what, 22? I'm not 22. Yeah. But they were like, you know, how do you feel about this? And I gave my little answer. And I was like, well, how do you feel about it? Like, you know, not to be rude, I wasn't like, oh, you're like 80. But
right.
What did you think? But they were quite old. And their response was just like, you know, I've been thinking about this probably since I was your age. And it just, with every decade that adds on, it changes. And I want to like commend you, because when I look at the, you know, the staging and the choreography, I guess, even of the not play musical, not musical,
it's a show.
It's a show.
It's a show.
It almost is like it was like a concert, not concert show, but the moves were such that, you know, I'm sure there was a lot of things that I'm sure a lot of people in the crowd couldn't do, but they weren't. It felt almost like we could get up there and join the cast. Yeah. You know, and when Keith brought up that very essential element of FAIRVIEW, it all kind of strung along for me. So were you aware that there would be so many older people in the audience, and did you want to make the, you know, the elements of the show very, you know, relatable for like this huge group of people? Is a very complicated question. And you know, I guess, how did you feel getting this you know, this piece, this show placed in your lap with that cast, with those, you know, with this particular cast?
I, along with my close collaborator, Remy Kurz, chose everyone on that stage. So the show wasn't given to me with people. The show was given to me, and like when I was approached, I was like, I won't do the show without Janelle. I won't do the show without Remy. And I won't do the show without Tuche Jacek, who is a lighting designer for my company, The Feather Theory, like since 2009. And I was like, we're going to start there. And if I can't work with them, then I don't want to do this show. Particularly because, one, I wanted to change a lot of the music from the original production. So I wanted to work with Remy Kurz, who's an amazing music arranger. I thought that it would be a particularly exciting challenge to work with someone like Janelle at a theater like Second Stage on a show about death, knowing that the audience would not look at Janelle right immediately and be like, my life and her life like has automatic symbiosis. Like, I trust her to tell me a universal story. Like, I just didn't believe that would be easy, and that was exciting. That was exciting for me to sort of respond to many of these things. I knew that the Second Stage audience would have a lot of problems with the show, right? And they'd be like, oh, like, this is not, like, I need, like, a small, young white girl to, like, tell me stories so that I can feel like I'm a young white girl, or she's my daughter, or she's my cousin, right?
Yes.
And I think, and I think some of the most exciting moments are when people who could not feel or look or on paper seem far away from, you know, identifying with Janelle would walk away feeling like, you know, I felt connected to that, and I felt, you know, excited by that. And then with our band as well, like, I feel so lucky to have had Remy leading and being a thought partner on, like, what do we want our band to look like, and how do we want these, like, saying to Second Stage, like, we want unicorns, and this is like a once in a lifetime opportunity. We want really good music. We want all unicorns on the stage. Yes. And I believe we got that. And I think, just again, like, the movement was made with them. Like, we were just in that studio upstairs at Second Stage being like, what do we want to do? Like, how can we, and we changed it, like, up until opening. Like, we changed the dance often because the more they got comfortable with dancing, the more I was like, do more. And the more that they got comfortable with just, like, playing with each other, I was like, there has to be this, like, leeway that you all can actually feel alive. Like, otherwise it'll just feel like a choreographed number, and then people are like, yeah, and then there was that dance that happened at the end, and I feel like some people are like, was that choreographed? Was that not choreographed? Like, people who know the people up there, they were like, you look like you were having way too much fun. You better not get in trouble. Equity gonna call you. You know, that kind of energy that's about living at the end of a show, that's trying to have you to acknowledge that you will die, I think was important. And if it could be achieved, and it sounds like from your perspective it was, then people from, like, it becomes a universal event, and then you don't have to think about age, you don't have to think about demographic.
And I am like Janelle's demographic, you know, but I was one of very few Black women who was present, you know, especially at that time of the day, you know, for that particular show on that particular stage. But it brought, like, there's nothing I think that can bring, short of birth, I guess, that can bring people together like death, you know. There's, you know, some people will feel really bold at, like, weddings or, you know, different other, you know, big life events, graduations, and, you know, they'll be like, oh, I'm not going to show up. Oh, I'm going to wear green. Like, you know, right. You know, but in that moment, again, like, folks were coming up to me at the end of the show, people who probably wouldn't speak to me if they saw me on the train, people who I probably wouldn't speak to, you know, if I saw them in a restaurant, who we're probably just passing each other on the street. We don't realize that there's this huge universal thing we all have in common that we all have to do one day. Not to just experience dying, but to also experience death. Yeah. And now, I guess, in a time where we're experiencing death in a very different way than we ever have in our immediate lifetimes, you know, we have, I guess, a new confrontation with death, a new way to see it. And I think it'd be really interesting if Janelle could give her COVID story, you know, that, you know, experience of, because she lost a lot of people. She talks about loss. She talks about all sorts of, you know, relatable things we all are going to experience one day. And I just absolutely loved the way it was portrayed and brought forth in the movement on stage. It was just like the person who, like, finds themselves and starts a band, you know. Right. It was beautiful. It was absolutely beautiful. Like, afterward, I think I told Keith a million times, I was like, we're starting a band, okay? We're starting a band.
It's happening. It's happening.
It's happening.
I've always wanted a band, always.
I also wanted to ask, like, a petty question about We're Gonna Die, because I was obsessing about this, like, while we were watching. The balloons, Raja, what's going on? What was it? And now I can ask you.
Which balloon?
The balloons that they in this, throughout this entire, like, hour-long show, there were balloons just falling from the ceiling in, like,
I counted. It was every 45 seconds.
Every 45.
And it started speeding up.
You were like, what is going on?
I'm not sure if I'm going to tell you. I might, but what do you think was happening?
So this play is all about mortality and the celebration of mortality. So I thought this was a way of sort of leaking the end throughout the entire show, leaking the celebration in this like very like boring waiting room looking place. It was a nice juxtaposition. That's just what I thought.
Yeah. And Mariah, what did you think?
I love that because I'm just like, yeah, kind of.
Also, it was every 60 seconds, actually. Every minute.
I was counting too slow. Okay. Definitely missed a couple of seconds.
Unless you got notes, because if they wasn't on the timer, I'm about to go off. But
look,
it's every
no tea, no shade. You know, I counted 45. No. But I was going to say, right before Keith gave his answer, I was like thinking, well, in my mind, it was like reminders that we're gonna die, and the amount of times in your life that you are reminded, whether you notice it or not, that you're gonna die, that mortality is an essential part of, you know, who we are as human beings, and as nature, as part of this earth. Like, it's essential that we do, you know, and those balloons falling every minute just kind of, over the course of the play, if we think of it over the course of Janelle's life, we're like, oh, you know what? Every, you know, few months or so, every day, not all the time, that's not always, you know, every 60 seconds, unfortunately, but every, you know, now and again, we, you know, are reminded that we're going to die. Yeah. That the end is near. And the element of it being a balloon is very much, you know, along, I guess, you know, my idea of it was along Keith's idea, which is balloons are not, you don't bring balloons to a funeral, you know. You don't bring balloons.
Funeral.
Copy.
Oh, I have another question. Keith, did you notice the balloons in We May Never Dance?
In We May... No. Oh my God. Wait a second.
Oh my God.
Alone. They're black balloons that say alone.
Oh my God.
Well,
that's wonderful.
A huge element,
Look
okay,
at you.
in your creative process.
Do you just carry a bag of balloons everywhere you go? Is that your deal?
No, but you know, there's certain things you're like, I'm still trying to figure this thing out. And sometimes, I mean, I also think there was like when Young Jean Lee approached me to direct We're Gonna Die, it was right after I had made We May Never Dance Again, and I felt like I was making the same piece. Like We May Never Dance Again. Like in my, like that, yes. I created that based on the Ernest Becker book, The Denial of Death, right?
Wow.
So, which is like the first quote in that documentary, like this idea that like we're all denying death. So I made this whole piece about like through mostly movement, like no, you know, there's music, but it's like it's a movement piece. And then Young Jean Lee asked me to create, to direct and choreograph We're Gonna Die, and I was like, I feel like I'm making the same work. In some ways, in many ways not, but you know, dealing with the same themes. So I felt like I had found something that I wanted to continue exploring, but I also don't, you know, I don't see a large discrepancy between what you said, Keith, and what you said, Mariah. I think. Well, I mean, I think that's people, we all love a metaphor. Look, and the idea is that like, we all love a metaphor.
Okay.
And that's because it just sort of works. Like, in no way does your description of like celebration of like the reminder of celebration is any different from this idea of like the reminder. It's just sort of your perspective. Right? Like there are people who are like, yes, like I cannot wait to die. Like it is going to happen. Like I celebrate that. Like it's coming. Something's coming. I don't know what, you know, it's like, it's coming. It's on the way.
Beautiful.
And then for some people there's an acute awareness to those reminders, which could seem like, you know, every minute on the minute, or if you like compact your life into an hour, then it's, you know, it's much quicker. I think you're both spot on in many ways.
Fabulous.
Wait, I just want to throw in no exit because the waiting room just screamed no exit to me. I just finished like studying that play and watching The Good Place, and just the idea of waiting and what are we doing while we're waiting?
Right. Have a bagel.
Please, and everything bagel and everything. Put some locks on that thing.
seen a lot of clips of your work, and a common theme seems to be Andy Warhol. I know nothing about Andy Warhol. Tell me, I want to
Yes.
ask about Andy Warhol and his influence on your work. And
Andy Warhol.
I want to know who your other influences are.
I'll start with my other influences. There are 4. Anne Sexton, poet. James Baldwin, God.
Yes.
Okay.
Lana Del Rey.
Oh, what?
Fiona Apple. Aside from Andy Warhol, those are my 4, including Andy Warhol, my 5 major influences on my life. And Andy Warhol's presence and obsession in my work has to do with, I think I can narrow it down to one particular quote of his from his book, From A to B and Back Again, the Andy Warhol philosophy, the philosophy of Andy Warhol. And he has this quote that's like, in America, ever since the movies were invented, they tell you what to do and how to do it, how to look like you're doing it, and how to feel like you look like you're doing it. And I feel like my work, like with my company and my devised theater, is like always wondering if that's true. Like, we as people make culture, or does culture create us? And that's something that I'm always grappling with. Like, what comes first? Like, are we the people who create the ideas and values and themes for which we live by, or is there like, you know, a substantial group of people who decide these things for us, and then we're just following along? Or is it like a dialogue, you know? That's what my obsession with Andy Warhol came from, and what it continues to be. And that question is unanswerable, and therefore my work just like continues to explore different themes each time.
Yeah,
I think that makes complete sense too, because a lot of the big theme that I notice in a lot of your work is the attention to detail. So I think that comes through super clear through your inspirations that you just talked about.
To what extent are we just being told that this is how things are supposed to go?
Right.
I think that is like so powerful, you know, because I grew up, you know, knowing quite a few dramatic folks who, you know, would not realize that we are not on a sitcom, and you can't just, you know, you don't get to ride off in the sunset. Come back here, you hurt me, or come back here, you stole my purse, like or my man. You know, like there's, you know, there's just so much, you know, that we get from media, and that's like a very shallow, surfacey kind of example, but like there's so much that we get from media, but how much of our stories are being told with this media that we are ingesting?
Right.
And are we telling stories by regurgitating, or are we having experiences, facing them, putting them down on paper, going to therapy, selling them to, you know, for millions of dollars? What are we doing? And I have a question about, I guess, before this, telling Black stories before this concept. If you guys don't mind, indulge me in my crazy.
Please.
Yeah,
please.
ask questions.
Let's go. Look, okay, we mentioned Bill T. Jones earlier, and when I was doing my, you know, deep dive, I kind of was looking at Katherine Dunham, Chuck Davis, just much older, you know, like people that my mother would constantly like push me to like watch as a young dancer. And you know, my aunt actually worked with the Chuck Davis company growing up. Like that was, you know, my aunt, she does African dance like professionally. She teaches also like right now, even she's, you know, in her 70s. Shout out to you, Auntie Anita. And she's absolutely fabulous and amazing, but she pays Chuck Davis so much tribute to, you know, what she, you know, what she does. And then, you know, learning about Katherine Dunham and just the whole like sphere of, you know, Black dance artists that were coming through during the Renaissance. You know, it started with Stormy Weather, and I just kind of just fell over the, you know, fell into it. But my mother instilled that in me from a very young age. How much of that influences you, I guess, before the now, and how do you bring, because what they were doing essentially was what you were, when you were saying earlier, like, here's the space as a director, here's the space, go for it, because I'm not going to tell you how to perpetuate Black culture on stage. I'm not going to, bring the dancing, at a time when media was like, we've been showing Black folks, looking crazy for so long. What happens when they tell their stories? So many amazing doors open up, and you have people like Catherine Dunham, who's kind of like pioneered starting your own dance style, your own dance company, and your own troupe, and your own community essentially of dancers. And are those ancestors for you, and in what ways do you kind of bring their spirit in?
Yeah, I mean, a person that you didn't mention that I often think about is included in that category is Zora Neale Hurston.
Yes.
Zora Neale.
Because because she was, I completely forgot she was even a Strange Loop. I was like, wait, why do I know that? It's like different splits in brain right now. But she was someone who was like, when folks like James, right, Mr. Baldwin, and folks were like leaving America, right, and like going to Europe, he's like, I'm not going. Like, I'm gonna sit right here and deal with my work right here. And I mean, and eventually James came back, and like also I think was just like, I'm gonna do the work here and be a mirror here. But I feel like in my memory, and this isn't historical, but it's what my understanding is and what I feel connected to specifically in answering this question. It's just, and I feel like when I graduated, I went to study dramaturgy in Germany, and I was there for 18 months, and then I was like, I have to go back to America. Like, I have to go back to America. Like, if I'm gonna do, like, my work is American, right? It's like I'm Black and queer, but only as it relates to being an American, actually. Right. I have to like come back here and grapple with that and deal with that here. So I think of Zora Neale Hurston as like an ancestor who was like, I'm not about to run away, and I'm gonna sit here and grapple with it and deal with it and be my artist self through this understanding. And that's, I feel connected to like trying, to deal with that in that way, to deal with storytelling and ancestry and something I'm dealing with now in my own work is this question of like, who gets to tell whose story, right? I'm like, we're in this crazy thing right now where everyone's trying to be a storyteller, and then we're like, who, like, are you allowed to tell my story? Is she allowed to tell my story? Are they allowed to tell my story? And I'm curious about that. I'm curious about like whose life are we, like, right now, like, is this in the like meta of this, like, is this your podcast, Keith? Is it my podcast? Like, are you telling my story? Am I telling your story? Are we telling Christopher's story? Is there like somebody else like outside and it's actually their story, and they're like, and then I'm walking down the street and then I hear this podcast being recorded, and we're just like
exactly
of their whole life, like, whose story is this?
I mean, that goes into one of my favorite quotes that you said in your documentary, and you introduced us to not Coldplay's Chris Martin, but the visual arts Chris Martin. And your favorite quote of his was like, art is like a finger pointing to the moon, and the best art is when the finger disappears. And I guess in this circumstance, when we're talking about like, who is this for? I think, in my opinion, like, it's for the masses to just take in for themselves. I started listening to podcasts because I was commuting from Long Island every morning at 7 a.m. to work at a job and hopefully audition in between all of that. And my only source of comfort was listening to artists on all sorts of different podcasts, people who were not qualified to be interviewing these people. But what makes a person qualified to interview anybody when it's just a conversation? And that's why, like, I don't think whatever we do with this, it doesn't really matter, because the point is that we're making something. And like, I'm grateful to be making anything right now.
Yeah, creating, like, continuing to, one, I mean, keep ourselves busy, but then it's like at the same time, there wouldn't be anything wrong if we weren't doing anything right now. But I am very fortunate, like you said, Keith, to be creating something and to be putting my energy and focus into a project like this. And honestly, getting the opportunity to talk to really cool people like yourself, Raja, like this is a really cool opportunity. So I'm very grateful for it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just about to say, I was like, especially when we get to have a conversation
No,
with Mr. Roger Feather Kelly. Here we are.
It's so wild to me, man. It is. I just come from a community of like theater people, from a theater called The Flea, and you know, when we saw like all of the work that you had made, there's just so many conversations that became so much more exciting, upsetting, and enlightening. All of those things, and like that's why we interview people like you. And before we let you go, I wanted to ask you about what people should do, what you're doing, and also like you have experience creating work from home and being productive from home. You created this thing called a Telegala Dance-a-thon, right, man? So you raised a fair amount of money being at home and dancing in your house for dance, because let's be honest, let's be real frank, theater will have a hard time coming through. Film, oh my god, Hollywood, they'll be fine. TV, dance is really where you need to, you know, congregate, and you rely on that patronage. So I want you to talk about fundraising and, you know, becoming the administrative aspect of your work.
Yeah. Well, I studied arts administration in college. So and a lot of my work after I graduated college, when I was working as a freelance dancer, I was an arts administrator and I was a company manager. So I sort of was building these skills before I started my own company and became my own sort of administrator. I also have just felt like a lot of the fundraising mechanisms just like didn't really work for me. And so I was like, how can I change this? Like, how can I do something different? And that's how the Gala-a-thon started, where I was like, I tried to do a Kickstarter one year and it was just like 30 days of the most like agonizing pain I just couldn't handle it. I was like, what if I did the Kickstarter in just like one day? Like just one day. Like I'll just email everybody and be like, y'all, I'm doing a Kickstarter. It's on one day, 24 hours. If you're gonna give money, like please just do it. And then on that, you know, I can stress out for one day. I cannot stress out for 30. And also it's just like either people are gonna give or they're not gonna give. So yeah, just like I like posted up in my like living room and I invited all my friends over when that was a thing. And we just like partied for 24 hours, like sitting in front of the computer, asking people for donations, showing clips of our work, and being like just introducing people to that. And we did that for 4 years. Wow. And it's been wonderful. It's so funny because this year we're like, okay guys, we're not doing an online fundraiser this year. We're going to throw a gala like in a space. And now we're all on lockdown.
No.
And it's funny, I was like, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And I was like, oh, right, wait, we actually invented the virtual fundraiser. And we actually have been doing it for 4 years. And now I'm getting emails where people are like, can you tell us how to do the virtual fundraiser? And I was like, oh, wow, this is hilarious. Like,
yes, man.
Just get your 10%. Get your 10% right off the top.
Right? I'm like, so maybe we don't fundraise, we'll just consult and then make the cash from consulting.
Yes, yeah.
I feel lucky that we have pushed past a time like this already, because like you're saying, and what you're intimating, Keith, is like dance is unfortunately, I believe, seen as a bit of like the back pedal of the arts. And so we're often put in situations where it's dire. So we come up with the things that will make it worth our own while, and lo and behold, we have innovated. You know, we weren't trying to innovate; we were just trying to survive. But
well, isn't that how most people innovate? It's the obstacle, and you know, with dance has so many obstacles, like the mortality, the lack of funding,
Right.
like I remember in your documentary, there was this woman who was like, I'm married now. I don't know how much longer I'm going to dance. This means so much more to me now because like I have a clock and like the human body has a clock, and like you're a constant reminder to celebrate that clock. And I respect that.
I wanted to ask you before you go, and you may not have an answer to this, but what do you think is kind of the next step for your career? Like, I'm curious, like if there's any dream projects
Over,
still
y'all.
that you...
This is it for me. I'm done.
Peace out.
Theater is dead.
Mic drop.
Theater is over. What are you talking about? I thought this was a funeral. I thought this was a funeral podcast.
No.
Saying goodbye to Roger Feather Kelly, who tried so hard just to make art and make people see themselves. And now that theater is over, so is Roger.
Yeah. Oh my God, man. You're out of your mind. And
I wasn't gonna say it, but I started a business. I hear you. I understand. Get the sentiment.
I don't know. I've been looking into like speculative theater. Like, what is speculative theater? I'm not gonna say more about that. I'm gonna let you think about it. But I'm just that's what I'm writing about right now. I'm writing about speculative theater. There's a
I have
really
so many
good
questions.
Warhol quote that's like, the only thing better than doing it is not doing it.
Something I would have definitely related to right before this quarantine, but I hear it. Okay.
Yes.
So that's these are things I'm pondering about. Like speculative theater, I feel like, you know, we're all really good at it if you think about it, right? It's like, you know, can people be entertained by the speculation of a theatrical event versus actually experiencing the theatrical event? And what can you offer them that might, you know, just like build a world around like the negative part of like the building of a theater? So I don't know. That's what I'm thinking about. I'm not. It's not complete.
I think Teddy Riley and Babyface did it last week.
I think it speaks to a larger argument that like, and I know we've said you're going to go a million times, but the, you know, roundabout in the 70s, 80s, they found an audience of young, hip, rich, white people, and that is their audience, and that's the audience they have now. Broadway, let's be frank, is going to be closed for a while. And we have to come to terms with building a new audience. And the reason I'm so excited to have you on is because the audience that is going to be that new demographic is going to probably be experiencing your art. I don't know what it's going to be, but I know that you've entered that realm, and the space is yours. And I just want to thank you so much for having the time to come through. Thank you, Raja Feather Kelly.
Yeah, I really appreciate it.
Christopher and Mariah, thank you all so much.